Welcome to the EuroPython podcast. This is episode 249. What's the best way to record the Python dependencies for the reproducibility of your projects? What advantages will lock files provide for those projects? This week on the show, we welcome back Python core developer Brett Cannon to discuss his journey to bring PEP-751 and the pylock.toml file format to the community. Brett has been working on a way to move beyond requirements.txt files for over 6 years. He was on the show previously to discuss his work on PEP-651, which was rejected. He decided to continue to push forward, authoring PEP-751 last year, which was accepted at the end of March this year. The PEP calls for a new file format to record your project's dependencies. The goal was to have a standardized, immutable record for what should be installed to reproduce your project in a virtual environment. He discusses working with other packaging projects and the compromises involved in creating a standard. All right, let's get started. The EuroPython podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Brett, it has been a while since we've talked.
It has, hasn't it?
How you been?
I'm good. I'm a dad now since last time we chatted, so that's been taking up my time.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
A little over a year now.
Yeah, I heard there was a recent birthday, right? Yeah. So I wanted to have you on to talk about this time, the success of a PEP, because I think the last time we talked about a PEP, it was not as successful.
That's right.
Which was a bit of a bummer. But congratulations on getting PEP-751 about lock files accepted.
Thank you. Yeah, that took a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you had me on last to talk about PEP-651, which was its predecessor that did not succeed. So...
yeah, we should talk about a little bit of the history there. I wanted to maybe start a little bit too. One of the other things that we've kind of had as an ongoing thing in the past is kind of your different roles inside of the Python organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of wondering where we at or the current status, because I know the steering council, well, there have been lots of changes there, lots of new faces there, which is, I think, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the April Fool's joke, which I'll provide a link to if people want to check that out.
Yes.
Yeah, so what, you are still a core Python dev?
I'm still a core Python developer. That is automatically true as long as I make at least one commit each year.
Okay.
And if I don't, I get asked if I want to keep being a core developer. You can say yes, and you get to keep doing it. If you say no, we'll basically turn off your commit rights just for security reasons. And you can always get it back. You just ask for it back. It's not a permanent, like, well, you're gone then. Like it's once and done, and that's it. And if you step away, you can never come back.
Okay. You can have a sabbatical of sorts.
You can do that, yeah. And okay. I am lucky enough to still get to commit enough and have enough time, primarily through work, that I still get to have my commit bit without anyone asking me. So nice. I'm still a core dev. I am still a member of the Python Packaging Authority, the PyPA. Yeah. To be clear, the authority bit is a joke. And
I didn't know it was a joke.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. Unfortunately, not enough people know that. So everyone thinks, oh yeah, you're very authoritative. I'm like, no, it's
sort of tongue in cheek.
Yeah, it's a group of projects that all work on packaging that'll kind of work together to just make everyone's lives easier, but it's not really a thing per se.
If you say you have authority, then you have authority.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
For anyone who's so this is fine.
Yeah.
For anyone who's a fan of Eddie Izzard, the British comedian.
Yeah.
She had a whole bit about how the world was conquered through the cunning use of flags. And so it's like, I declare this in the name of Britain and India, it was the joke she used. And it's like, well, how can you do that? We've been living here for hundreds of years or thousands of years. Like, no flag, no country. Anyway, it's really funny. I think it's from their Dress to Kill.
Okay.
Anyway, So yeah, I'm still a member of that because I'm still committed to the packaging project. It's very aptly named, but it's hard to explain when you say you work on the packaging project for packaging. But I'm still doing that. You are right. I'm no longer on the steering council. I stepped down after 5 years to give space on the council. I also, when we were proposing the steering council model and all that stuff, and we were settling and all that, I had suggested 5-year term limits. It didn't happen. There are no term limits, but I just decided to kind of stick with what I suggested and thought. So did my first 5 years since the inaugural committee and just decided I'm going to take a break, at least, assuming I ever go back, and just let someone else have a chance. So
yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So this definitely falls into that, the PEP-751.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of think of like, well, how do I get into this thing? Because we definitely talked about the idea of it back, 2 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer.
I think more even, yeah.
Yeah. And so you said, well, I could talk for a whole episode about the history of this thing. So maybe we could start there. Maybe we could start, okay, you said 6 years ago, which that's interesting to me because that's right about just a little bit after my time of getting into Python. So when I was trying to figure out packaging myself. So do you want to start there? Let's talk about the history a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I should say it's probably been even longer, but the farthest back piece of evidence I can find that I was thinking about this topic is from February of 2019 on what used to be known as Twitter, where Zhuping, who goes by Uranus Jr. online, he mentioned something about wanting to do a requirements.txt v2.
Okay.
And I replied on that. It's like, yeah, I'm still thinking about this in the back of my head. So I don't know how far back I've actually been thinking about this, but at least there's an impetus there.
All right.
And when it happened,
some documentation.
Yeah, there's exactly. I have the receipts for at least 6 years ago.
Okay.
And it led to a big discussion on discuss.python.org, where all the packaging discussions happen, about doing a requirements file v2. Because I don't know how people know this, but requirements.txt and all of it isn't a standard. It's totally just a pip thing.
Okay, so the pip team came up with it at the time that they were like,
exactly.
Okay.
I don't know how. I mean, I don't even know how old requirements files are. I mean, they're way older than that.
Okay,
but there's no standard, right? If you go to packaging.python.org, that is you'll find specifications for all the PEPs, all the packaging standards, at least from the PyPA's perspective of someone's written a PEP. We've had a discussion at discuss.python.org about it. One of the delegates from the steering council for packaging PEPs, which is either Paul Moore and I think technically Dolan Stuff, although Paul does most of it unless he delegates to someone such as myself or somebody else. Those all get turned into specifications. And there is not one for requirements files.
Wow.
The only documentation is what's in the pip docs.
Okay.
And it's enough to use them, but it's not a specification, right? There's no grammar about what's allowed. It basically just says, here are the flags that pip accepts that you can also set in your requirements files. And effectively, these are commands that pip's got to run on your behalf, which is why the file looks the way it looks. It's effectively, you're specifying line by line commands for pip to run.
Okay.
When you think about it in the end.
Yeah.
Although you can kind of, obviously, pip does other things, groups it all together and stuff, but that's one way to think about it, right? Because you can actually specify per flag, right? This is why requirements files, you get to say like -r, include another requirements file. But point is, not a specification, not something that other tools can necessarily build and use in a way that everyone has agreed is the way to do it.
Okay.
The way everyone's done it previously is just almost in a way reverse engineer what pip does and kind of like, okay, we'll just make that work. And this is why a lot of tools export requirements.txt files, but they don't necessarily consume them. Right? So like, I don't think I'm wrong here, but I could be. But like PDM, Hatch, Poetry, etc., they will export requirements files, right?
Okay.
But they don't consume them.
In their version of freeze kind of command.
Exactly, right? Because enough external tooling and such, right? Cloud providers like that provide hosting, they all know how to consume requirements.txt files because presumably they all just run pip behind the scenes for you. You know, like if you upload to Azure on certain services that use Python, they'll detect you have a requirements.txt file. automatically consume that, run that on your behalf, and that way your environment that's running in the cloud automatically gets that stuff installed. Okay, great. Because they're probably just doing pip behind the scenes. They don't have to think about it. But there was no standard. Everyone just kind of figured it out, right? And when I got involved with Python packaging, one of my big things and pushes was to try to standardize all the artifacts that we use in packaging, because I didn't think we could jump straight from the world we were in, which was at the time everything was pip and setup tools, to a world of, okay, we're going to wipe all that away and we're going to switch to a single new tool to rule them all. And that's just what we're going to do. There was just too much history, too much convention, and it was just too big of a thing to try and lift the entire community over to one tool all at once.
Right.
And even with a decade-long thing, like that's a heavy lift.
Yeah.
And so the approach I decided to take was, well, why don't we look at what the community uses in terms of artifacts, like files and stuff, and see if we can build standards for those and have specifications backing all those things so that all the tools can just agree on those things, because that's really the thing you're going to work with and consume at the end of the day, right?
So that means that the people that make all these tools are comfortable with there is a file that has been defined in the past, even though it's kind of a loose definition. You can, as an artifact, take that and polish it up and make it much more, specified, like how it's done, and they should be able to change their tools to just look at this new file type and its new rules. That would be an easier lift.
Yeah, exactly. So like the first step in all this was pyproject.toml.
Yeah.
Right? Because before that, the convention was setup.py. Right? Because that's what DistTools did, and that's what setup tools thus ended up doing. But it was never a standard. There was never a specification behind setup.py. It was just what setup tools used and what DistTools did, right? But the first step was like, okay, what's the baseline thing that we can try to get a spec for that the community could maybe rally behind, and then all the tooling can base themselves on, right? And make it easier to switch between, build tooling on top of that file specifically, and all this other stuff. And pyproject.toml was the first one because it allowed us to have a specification on how do you specify all the metadata for your project. And that was the first step, right? And I would like to think that was successful. People seem to have kind of latched onto pyproject.toml and think that's generally a good file format and it works out pretty well. And
yeah, I don't know what the acceptance is like. I see the majority of the quote unquote popular tools. I don't know what else to call them. The things like UV and Hatch and Poetry. I feel like most of them are all on board with the idea of it.
All the packaging tools have picked it up. It's just whether every project out there has switched over. That's really always the question.
So
with all this,
the consumers of these tools, the end projects themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think pretty much all new projects are using it at this point. It's just have all the projects you're using been updated subsequently since pyproject.toml became a thing.
Was there something that would hold them back?
Time and effort. One of the things I've discovered since I started getting involved with packaging is packaging is usually one of the last things anyone bothers to update. Usually what people do is they go to the last project they created, copy and cargo code over the thing that worked, and just keep using it. So if the last thing they did was setup tools with setup.py, they just copy that over.
I don't need to learn the new stuff. I'm gonna just use what I've been using.
Whatever. I'm just creating a source distribution, a tar.gz file. Whatever. I don't care. Right? Or maybe you're fancy enough to be making wheels, right? If you're really thinking way back and you're really copying this stuff forward. But it's one of these things of you just have to be willing to put the time and effort in. And usually it's the last thing people want to do. And then if they think about it, it's usually before they do a release. And then the last thing you want to do before a release is have bugs with your release process. And have your packaging something break on you because you tried to read a blog post or watch a video or something and somehow miss a step or screw up or whatever and have it fail and screw it. And then you roll back, go back to the old thing, and then you never want to touch it again.
Right.
So getting people to update can take a while. I mean, pyproject.toml's old in a way. It's years and years and years and years and years. Like we've had this for quite some time at this point. But I mean, if you haven't updated your project, you probably don't have it anymore. Luckily, because of all the tools that picked it up and it's all the tutorials now and everything else.
Yeah. We've definitely covered it a lot on RealPython and trying to make sure that, I push it on the podcast as much as I can.
Which is appreciated.
Yeah. Because it makes sense to me, like if you're going to set up a project beyond just like, okay, I'm just going to, pip freeze this. It's like, well, if you're going to really share this with other people, there's lots of other things you should be thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is a really organized way to do it, which is nice. So,
yeah. And so that was a big motivator, right? Is to try to get something like that standardized and have a specification behind it.
Yeah.
And that worked, and it seemed to do the right thing. And so for me, the next question was, I had kind of two goals after that was, could everything that pip does be broken up into libraries so that it'd be easier to, I hate saying the word competitor, but have alternatives to pip, right? Because when I got involved, like you had to use setup tools and you had to use pip.
Yeah.
Right. And I'd rather have it be you choose to use setup tools and you choose to use pip.
Okay.
Right. How do you make it a choice, not a requirement, so that things fit your needs as best as possible? And once again, it's hard to switch if everything underneath you is bespoke to that tool. And thus, once again, copying the stuff over from your old thing is the best way forward, because switching is so much overhead and work.
Right.
It doesn't make you want to try newer stuff.
Okay.
And potentially make your life better and easier. So looking at that, one of the things that I realized was, well, what's the next big file that almost every project has? A requirements file.
Yeah.
That is not standardized. A lot of people use it. Once you have pyproject.toml, right, as a way to specify kind of like what your project requires.
Yeah.
Like the next thing is using requirements.txt file as lock file, right, as a way to specify, here are all my dependencies at this version, and here are all my transitive or indirect dependencies at those versions. And this is what I want, everything I want installed, period.
Okay.
No bonus stuff, nothing I don't know about. It's literally a complete list that if I go from top to bottom, install all the stuff, I will have everything I need to make my project work.
Yeah.
Right? It's what pip tools spits out when you run pip compile, right?
Okay.
Is just that complete list of what I want installed. That's what a lock file is for. And there was no standard. We didn't have a specification around this. And so naively, somewhat, I mean, I knew it was going to be a big lift. I didn't expect it to be this big of a lift.
Past Brett.
Right. I decided, let's tackle this one. Let's see how this goes. And so, as I said, I at least have the receipts showing I was thinking about this as long as 2019. And then, what year was that? Was it 2022? Was PEP-651, I think?
It has created July of 2021.
2021. Yes. I can't keep track anymore.
It's okay.
Yeah. So I started working on that 6 months prior to that with Purdue and Zhu Ping, I think, as my co-authors on 665. And I was trying to create a log file. Now, when I was working on it, I was doing it from a perspective of security, right?
Right.
Because that's one of the nice things about log files is not only does it help with reproducibility, it also helps with security, right? Because then you have this extra protection of, I'm not only going to install the same version of something, I'm going to install the same bits, right? Like I can include hashes and stuff, right?
Right.
And pip, by default, doesn't do the most secure thing you could do with a requirements file if the requirements file is treated as the lock file, right? Like if you want to do the most secure install you can with pip from a requirements lock file, you need to tell it to only use binaries, which means only use wheels. You have to tell it to not install any dependencies. It can only use what's listed in the file, and thus you've checked to know exactly what's going to get installed. And then you also need to say you require hashes, and that you check those hashes on the files that you downloaded.
Okay.
All those things are optional and turned off by default.
Right. You don't see all the hashes. You don't see the.
If you even have them, they don't even have to be there. Like with
right.
pip compile from pip tools, it's a flag you have to add. It's not even installed by default.
Right. Okay.
So it's one of these things where there's a lot of extra steps to try to do the nice secure thing.
Right.
Which I would argue should be the default thing. And this is no shade to either tool, right? Like they have a lot of historical reasons for why they have the defaults the way they have them. But for me, it's like, okay, can we do a standard for lock files that captures everything that people want for, and then also on top of it makes it more secure by default?
Right. The security thing is the thing that I think has been a conversation, definitely since I started Python.
Yeah.
Again, in that 6-7 year kind of thing where you got a variety of sort of potentially problematic things happening in the world there, and you want to make sure that what you are installing is what's on there. And I remember going to a variety of conferences and seeing this SBOM thing, and I was like, well, that's interesting, this idea of the bill of materials. Like, what is it that I'm actually doing? And I'm feeling in a lot of ways that this is trying to answer that and saying this is what I want. I'm not sure where the overlap is completely, but
so SBOMs are a little different. So SBOMs are, software bills of material.
Okay.
And this effectively can do one of two things. And the reason I know about this is I'm the PEP delegate for Seth Michael Larson's PEP to add SBOMs to wheels. So this is kind of an active thing. And now that I got log files done, I'm sorry, Seth, I will get to your PEP, but I need to read it and accept it probably.
Okay.
But effectively for Python, there's kind of two kinds of software bills of material. One is when your build backend builds your code and it creates a bill of material of what was used to create your wheel. So like, let's say you build NumPy or you use Pyo3 to build some Rust project, right? You can have a bill of material saying, hey, the compiler used to create your .so files that are part of that wheel was Rust version 1.65 or something, or GCC whatever, or Clang 19, or all those little details of what it took to go from your source code to those binary artifacts.
Okay.
Right? So that's one type of SBOM, to just kind of like go like, okay, hey, we found out there's a massive security gap or hole in some compiler. You probably want to rerun everything that was used to make that.
Okay.
So those are from the back end automatically. Like they can just say like, hey, I did all this work for you. Here's the bill of materials used to make your wheel.
Okay.
The other one is when you vendor stuff. So for instance, pip, the reason it can just be dropped in and work is pip has no dependencies listed. It ships all its dependencies in its source code, right? Like if you go in the pip repo, you'll find a vendor directory under pip, where they've literally hand copied, I'm sure there are scripts, but they've literally copied all their dependencies into the repo.
Okay.
And so another thing you can do with your software bills of material is say, hey, I've embedded code from this project, from this version. And that's another thing to go like, oh, hey, you might not list it as a dependency, right, in your lock file, right? And you could actually do that over your lock file and go like, hey, there's a CVE, right? Or security hole or whatever about one of my dependencies, you can tell from lock file. But if a project vendored it, it won't get listed in a lock file because it's literally embedded in the project. But with the software bill of materials, you get a piece of metadata in the wheel that will at least tell you, hey, this might not be listed as a dependency, but it basically is, right?
Okay.
Because it's embedded in the software. And that way you get a more complete view of all the software you're using, so that if you do find out like there's some massive, the reason this all exists is because of the Log4j security hole that was found a few years back.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you need to say, hey, there's a massive security hole in our community, like requests or something, or HTTPX or whatever, like someone's not checking some certificate thing and oh my God, big hole. Software bills of material along with the lock file should be enough for you to find if everyone's filling out their SBOMs, to be fair, and everyone's got a lock file.
Okay.
That should be enough to find all the places in your project and all your code where you're using the software that has this big security hole.
Okay.
So that's what SBOMs are for.
Yeah, and it feels like they are maybe more of a thing to pay attention to for something that is a library that is using all those other tools, like you talked about, like these sort of Rustified things or C extension types of things, and all those things that are using then not pure Python type of wheels and stuff like that.
Exactly, and only if you're vendoring.
Okay.
And most projects don't vendor other project source code directly in their source code.
Okay.
Right, like pip, I think, is somewhat unique in terms of at least publishing something to PyPI, where they've literally copied code from another project and put it in and can identify, I got this version of this project and it's sitting in my source code, so you should know about it.
Okay.
SBOMs, frankly, are fairly enterprisey kind of thing.
Sure.
I think most hobbyists and other people aren't really going to worry about it, but
I worked at in a company, and I had to do sort of a similar thing of vendor management and, get all these
Yeah, exactly.
pieces of paper certified.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not important for your hobby project, but pretty important when you've got a company running on this stuff. And the last thing you want to have is a security hole that's going to take your website or project or whatever your company is selling down. Right. So it's not for the weekend hobbyist or the student, but it definitely for any company, it's important. But I mean, back to log files and security.
Yeah.
The other thing you want to make sure you do is make it painless. Because as soon as you make security painful, no one wants to do it.
Sure.
Right. Totally fair, right? For a lot of us, open source is a hobby thing and something we do in our spare time. And the last thing you want to do is make it burdensome. So that was another big motivator with doing all this. And with PEP-665, the way we leaned into Zuping and I, was wheels only.
Okay.
Right. And then there's no, the amount of software involved for an installation goes way down. Right. It's just what's in the wheel and just what you run to do the install.
Okay.
Right. There's no, and I've got to trust the compiler and whatever else the backend needs to call to make your stuff run, Python, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just the space of potential security problems shrinks greatly. Because for those of you who don't know, wheels, and the reason why, even if you write pure Python projects, you should still have a wheel. Installing a wheel is literally unzipping files and putting them in certain places. I mean, it's a little simplified. It's not that much of a simplification. I'm just leaving out some bonus steps for entry points, right? To put something in your bin directory or scripts directory if you're on Windows in your virtual environment. There's a little extra step there to generate that Python file to make that work. But installing the stuff as a library into your site packages, it's literally an unzip and copy.
Okay.
That's simple. There's nothing else. But when it's a source distribution, you're executing a backend project like Hatchling or PDM backend or setup tools or whatever. And then that is building.
And it's compiling something, building it.
Yeah, it's compiling, writing a whole bunch of who knows what code in order to make your thing work. So it's just the amount of people and things involved shrinks greatly when all you're doing is unzipping and copying versus I'm going to run this backend that's going to do all this other stuff to make things happen.
Right.
So PEP-665 was very specifically only wheels, required hashes, and a bunch of other security things that were transparent to the user because the tools creating the log files would include that information, but wouldn't necessarily be in your face or something you had to manually do, or would be burdensome having it there and used on your behalf, right? Like checking hashes shouldn't be a big deal, right? It's we're tool creating log file writes down the hashes, the tool doing this all just checks the hashes because you want the exact same bits, right?
Okay. We match, we don't match, right? Okay.
Exactly. Because if you're specifying you want a certain wheel, you want it to match.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that PEP got rejected about a year after starting working on it at the beginning of 2022 because there was just enough projects that, enough companies, honestly, that needed source assists to be used.
Okay.
And I kind of, what ended up coming out of that whole conversation of that PEP was there's a spectrum, right, of how projects manage their packages, and libraries that they install. They're hobbyists and stuff, whatever, somewhat flexible, whatever. Startups, still fairly flexible in how their workflow works.
Right.
And then when you get a little bit bigger than a startup and you've been around just long enough, you have your ossified, calcified, don't want to change their workflow.
Sure.
And I'm sure everyone's been at that company where, why is this done this way? It's just the way we started. We thought it was the right way 10 years ago. No one wants to redo it because we all know there's mistakes, but oh my God, the cost of redoing how we do software deployments would be too hard, blah, blah, blah. And then when you get past that, you get to the Microsofts and the Googles and Metas. The companies are so big, they don't even use the build tools the projects come with, right? They build everything from scratch.
They're doing it all themselves, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They have entire teams dedicated to their deployments, right? So they all this stuff doesn't even necessarily affect them as much because oh, sure, but you know what? We don't need wheels from people. We'll build our wheels.
Yeah.
Right. But it's that middle group. Those companies are a little past startup, but not billion, trillion dollar companies that have full staff to just keep stuff running, where they just came to us and during the discussion said yeah, I need source distributions. I need SDIS.
Mm-hmm.
I need those tar.gz files. Our whole workflow is based around those.
Okay.
And we were saying look, if you need that, that's fine. Just build the wheels from outside and then have them get locked in the wheel, right? So it's a separate step. But it's not we didn't think a burdensome step. It's just like, look, you're still, the way all the tools work is they go from source tree to sdist to wheel.
Okay.
Period. And then they install the wheel. So even if you download an sdist, most of the tools still use that sdist to build the wheel to then install the wheel, right? You don't skip steps here. So it's like, well, if you got an sdist, you're still going to behind the scenes build the wheel.
There's an artifact of a wheel in there. Okay.
Yeah. Build the wheel ahead of time, depend on that wheel, and then lock against that wheel, and that's what you ship. And just enough people went, no. It's changed our build system. It's going to be painful.
Okay.
No, I don't want to. And so the PEP got rejected. Basically, lukewarm reception and enough people needing sdist support.
Mm.
And so that was February 2022, I think.
Yeah. It says, no, there's like, I don't know if you go by post history.
Oh, there's a lot of posts in November of 2021 too.
Yeah.
So rejection in beginning of 2022.
Okay. It's time to shine a spotlight on another RealPython video course. The course is titled Using the Python Subprocess Module. It's based on the written tutorial by Ian Curry. And in the video course, Stephen Loyens shows you how the Python subprocess module is used to run shell commands and manage external processes, how to call subprocess.run with a list of arguments, and you'll learn how subprocess.call, subprocess.run, and subprocess.popen methods differ in how they execute commands and handle output and return codes, how to execute multiple commands in sequence by chaining them together, using pipes or running them consecutively, and how this module provides tools for error handling and process communication, making it a flexible choice for integrating command line operations in your Python projects. RealPython video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and where needed include code examples for the techniques shown. All lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com.
And so once that happened, I went back and started to think about it again. I was like, I'm not giving up on this. No one said lock files were bad. No one said they wouldn't like to have lock files. It was just the format that I proposed, or we proposed, just didn't work for them. So I went back, thought about it. I took the feedback as, I really need sdist support, and if you want to do that securely, you also have to be able to lock your build dependencies, right? You have to be able to lock for your build backend and all this other stuff. So I tried to come up with a way to do that. So more discussions, more thinking, et cetera. Fast forward, and then I believe it was March of 2024 is when I posted maybe it was July, posted PEP-751. Yeah, the discussion had been going for quite a while before that, because there was
I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, you've been thinking about it.
There was the draft PEP version before I got the number, and then there was when I finally decided to get the number, because I had learned my lesson to, basically the way I explained it to my wife Andrea was, I think this next time, I'm going to kind of go in the way I want to do it. I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to make anyone else suffer with me as co-author. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it the way I think it should be done. I will address the sdist problem, as I called it, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
And so big discussion that was all happening in 2023. And funny enough, the feedback I got was it's too confusing trying to lock your build dependencies for sdists, which is what people wanted before. So it kind of put it in everyone's face, like, maybe I don't want that. So we wiped that off the table, but we kept sdist support. And then that led to PEP-751 in July of 2024. And went through multiple iterations. The first version was fairly well based on PDM, PDM's lock file, which was inspired by poetry. It was designed to be, from a security perspective, to be auditable. It's designed to be computer written, but human readable.
Okay.
Right? So you're not meant to write these log files by hand, but they are designed such that you could read them in a PR or whatever workflow you have and audit them and be able to spot check things and be able to look at it as a human being and read it and go like, okay, I understand what this is listing and what would be installed.
And that's the choice of the file format then? The TOML?
Yeah.
Okay.
So TOML.
The tables and things that are included there, is that part of it?
Exactly. And the structure of the tables and what gets included and what's not.
Okay.
Right. Like we include like upload time, right? And that's because it's free because it's part of the index server specification for Python package index servers, such as what PyPI is. They can include the upload time. It seemed reasonable to include that so that people can look at that and see that and go like, okay, this was uploaded roughly the same time as everything else. So that's not a red flag versus why the heck was this thing uploaded really recently versus this release happened like 6 months ago? Like, why is this one file so new?
Okay, so the machine that sort of could check this machine-wise could see that difference there, and it's
not even
something that's generated automatically.
Or a human being, right? Because if you're looking at a diff and like file A was uploaded 6 months ago, and in this diff, I'm suddenly adding locking file B, but that was uploaded yesterday.
Huh.
And you're like, wait, what?
Okay.
Same version, but this file's 6 months newer. What's going on?
Okay.
Now, it could be totally legitimate, right? Like there could have been a compile problem that no one noticed or whatever. Like this is all legitimately supported, but it might also cause you to want to go check out what the heck was going on and make sure the project didn't have someone hack into it and suddenly upload a file that's malicious.
Okay.
Right. It's that sort of thing.
Right.
That it was designed such that if you look at it if you look at diffs in the lock file, you can look at it, understand it, and go like, okay, that all looks fine. Nothing's throwing a red flag in my face.
Right. It's going to pop with a table specifically saying, hey, look here, and as opposed to being just a big list of stuff, you could actually see categorically what's different.
Like if it was all in JSON, it might be a bit harder to really pull out like all the little details, right? Of like the file size and the upload time, what version is, and what's the name of the project, and all this stuff. And just looking at a diff and just trying to comprehend what the hell is this trying to say? What was changed? What was added? What was removed?
Okay.
So it was very much a goal to make it readable from an auditing perspective for security, such that. I mean, hopefully there'll be auditing tools. Like pip audit actually already supports it.
Okay.
To try to find once again, project versions that are problematic. But hopefully they'll also, some other person or tool, maybe a pip audit, I don't know, will write a tool that'll be able to consume it and help do extra checks. While you also as a human being will be able to look at it and just go like, yeah, that looks weird. What's going on there? Right. Yeah. Versus like, this is a binary blob. I can't read anything out of it. I've got to have a tool tell me everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so the first version was based a lot around PDM and trying to lock down build backends for source distributions. Everyone got too confused by trying to lock source distributions, so I did another version that took all that out and simplified things a bit. And then talking with UV, they had some extra needs that PDM didn't have, and Poetry didn't have, because those are the three main tools that were actively engaging, because other tools were invited, but they just didn't have the bandwidth to participate.
Okay.
And honestly, a lot of it was conversation with Poetry and UV. And so UV had some asks and all that. I rewrote the PEP completely and changed the structure to be more graph-based versus list-based, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. Through conversations of that, it came out that locking to it's requiring the version of a project actually was problematic for source distributions, because enough projects use stuff like setup tools SCM to dynamically generate their version number, and that version number can be tied to the date. So suddenly you might not have your SDIS match what's recorded, because if you compiled on a Tuesday, it might literally have the name Tuesday in its version number, versus if you compile on a Thursday, and that's still totally legitimate and legal in Python packaging. So that caused everyone to just okay, this is getting complicated and hard. Maybe we should take a step back and scale it back.
Okay.
And so I did. And that went from trying to make a lock file that what I would call multi-use. So some people call them universal lock files. The idea that a lock file could be used on multiple platforms, like on Mac, on Linux, on Windows, and different versions of Python.
Right. And those are going to be different. Those are going to be different wheels, or potentially SDIS.
Different wheels, different requirements, right? Because in any of your projects, you can specify, hey, this dependency only applies on this OS or only on this version of Python, right? Common example you might see today is the typing extension project, right? That adds in all the extra newer typing stuff before it lands in the standard library. You want to use an older version of Python,
Okay.
right? You might say like, hey, if I'm using Python older than this, I need the typing extension project to pull in this feature that I want. But if I'm on something newer than this, you don't need to install this dependency.
Okay.
Right? It's totally optional because it's already in the standard library and I've got it.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Or if you're on Windows and it's like, oh, hey, I need this extra thing that's a Windows specific thing to work around to make this work, but I don't need on any other platform, so don't worry about it. Right. So it's very easy to have divergence in terms of what you might need to lock.
Okay.
If you want a single lock file to work across a myriad of platforms and Python versions. So that's what I would call multi-use versus single use, where it's like, no, this is one set of requirements. It only works on this one platform, this one Python version, and that's all we do. This is what like PipTools does, right? Is PipTools spits out single-use lock files because they just lock what's on your machine, and that's it. Period. Done. It is actually, it's something that I don't think a lot of people realize. The log files that PipTools spits out, at least historically, I haven't checked recently, weren't cross-platform, right? They weren't multi-use. You couldn't take one you built on Windows and necessarily guarantee that would work on another one or on a different Python version.
So different lock files for every...
Yep. Yeah, you'd have to just generate them per platform because PipTools ran pip on your machine to say this is what would get installed and just wrote that down.
Okay.
But what would get installed varies.
Yeah, so in your particular case, one of the crucial things you would want to do is say, I want to create a lock file that is about the project, and it might land in all these different places, and we can have just this one artifact going back to that, this file. There.
Exactly.
Okay.
You want that one lock file that covers as many platforms as possible because no one wants like 5 lock files or 10 lock files, right? Like if you need one for Linux, one for Mac, one for Windows, and just point 5 different versions of Python, like that's 15 lock files. No one wants 15 lock files if you want to have that level of coverage.
Yeah, it's easy to change the data in a single file or see the changes, like you said, going back to the diffing things. And
well, and exactly. And not everything's going to be different. It only might be 1 or 2 projects that differ in that matrix of like 15 between 5 Python versions and 3 OSs.
Yeah.
If you even stick to just 3 OSs, who knows? You might be using FreeBSD or who knows what.
Right.
But like the only difference might be like one package.
We got new destinations now, right?
Yeah, right. And but the difference might be really minuscule. And so there was always a desire to make it work multi-use, but it was getting complicated.
Okay.
And after switching from flat list to graph, and then people going like, okay, this is getting really complicated. Like, this is getting hard. Like, maybe we should just take a step back. Maybe we really should just do requirements.txt via version 2.0, as had been discussed way back in 2019.
Go back to that 6 years ago.
Right?
Yeah.
And let's scale it. Let's not be so ambitious. Like, Brett, why don't you try not to be so ambitious? Let's take it back a bit. Now, obviously, I've been doing this for years, literally at this point. So it's like, okay.
Right. The ratchet has been locked at a certain point. I don't want to like go backward. Yeah.
Whatever it takes to get something accepted and getting this moving forward, fine. Like, I really wish we could get multi-use lock files working.
Okay.
Like, right. Like, flat list of files versus graph. I like flat lists for auditing reasons, but I get why the graph was a thing, why people want it, and there's reasons why I tried it. But at that point, it's like, okay, whatever. Come out, and I say like, okay, and to be honest, my wife was getting sick and tired of hearing me talk about lock files. Like, I had to get this done. Like,
do you have those conversations where you like explained it out to her? Like,
oh
just
yeah,
I want to, like, you're my rubber duck here. I'm going to explain this whole thing out to you. Okay, interesting.
And she's like, what's wrong? Why are you grumpy today? Oh, lock files. What's going on? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Oh, that name. Or usually not a person specifically, but it's just like, I'm tired of hearing about lock files. When's this going to be done? Can you just finish it? And I honestly said, all right. I publicly said this, like, this is going to be done by end of March 2025. The North American phrase is hell or high water, but basically it's going to get done. Either reject it or tell me what I need to do, Paul more, to get this accepted. And at that point, Paul going like, okay, we've been working on this for literally years. Poor Brett's been working on this for literally years.
Yeah.
I'm not going to reject it. I might ask Brett to cut stuff out if it doesn't look like it's going to work. but I'm not going to flat out reject it. So like, okay, good. I will at least get something out of all this.
Right.
And at that point, it's like, okay, just requirements.txt v2, right? Just it's going to be a list, not a graph. So it's just going to be a list of things to install, top to bottom. So you could actually do a parallel install, which is the nice thing about it. This was the proposal at the time. And just read the file, read the thing, double check that there's a little thing at the top that says like, okay, this only works in this environment. Otherwise, read through the thing, install as appropriate, done.
Okay.
Straightforward. Okay. Just with extra easier to read, it's a spec versus not with the requirements files, a little extra security in there, right? Extra stuff to just try to make it easier to read and work with. That was going to be it. And I got really heavy handed, like, okay, this is where we're at, people. You cannot propose new ideas. You can say we can take something out. That was it. Here's some open issues. We can clarify namings and stuff, but like no more asking for more.
Okay.
Period. Done. Like this is like 2025 was like the year of Brett takes no more feedback, no more new ideas.
Okay.
So I did that. And then maybe February. Yeah, I think maybe mid-February. I said, okay, this is it. I have the version done, right? It is single-use lock file.
Yeah.
It is a set, really, technically. It requires a set of packages to install. This is it. And then Frost Ming, the creator and maintainer of PDM, comes up and says, oh, I'm really disappointed that you can't do multi-use lock files. Can you show me where people rejected this idea and were really against it? I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, because to be fair, I got rid of multi-use lock files, not because I wanted to, but just because I wanted to get the PEP done.
Okay.
Right? I really wanted multi-use lock files because lock files can be one of two things. It can be an export target, kind of like what everyone does with requirements files now, right? Like PDM, Poetry, UV, they all can export a requirements file. And so you can export them, requirements file as a lock file with all those tools.
Okay.
Or you try to make this specification broad enough and rich enough that it becomes the lock file format that the tool actually uses itself, right? Because right now, if you look at all these tools, whether it's
to recreate them and
literally just be what they use, right? Because if you look if you look at PDM has a pdm.lock file. Poetry has a poetry.lock file.
Right.
UV has a UV.lock file.
Their own specific thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're all bespoke. They're all proprietary. They're all undocumented, and they're all for internal use only.
Right.
Right.
You're creating it, but you're not going to look inside of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Per se. Okay. Yeah.
But the point is, once again, every tool did it themselves their own way. Yeah. And I'm not saying that they didn't have reasons, but once again, if you're me and you're trying to get everyone to work behind specifications and standards to try to get it so that all the tooling becomes universal.
Right. All these communities can be able to consume the same thing.
Exactly. Why do I have to go like, okay, if I want to audit what's in my log file for UV, right, I have to export it and then check that, but that's only going to be on that platform. How do I then check somewhere else? Yeah. Same thing with PDM, right? It's like, I have to export for all the platforms I want, or I have to write a tool specifically for their lock file, or hope that they provide me the tool that I need to make that work.
Okay.
Versus if they all use the same lock file format for everything, even for their own general locking for all platforms, then you don't have that problem. Write the tool once and it works for all of them. They can still do fancy UX, user experience, and manage your virtual environments. Still be a workflow tool. But for the thing that all of them do, which is have a lock file, why can't we have just one?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, this is literally just the instructions of like what this project needs. I mean, it goes back to the word requirements, you know? Like, why does that have to be bespoke? Yeah.
Because it gets surprisingly complicated.
Okay.
And it's an area where some people have liked to try to innovate, right? So for instance, UV has a concept of workspaces, which they got from the Rust world.
Okay.
But that is not a spec. That is totally a UV concept from a Python and packaging perspective. And they use it in their lock files. So for instance, UV probably won't be able to standardize on this as their internal lock file format. But they will totally be able to export to it, and they actually plan to.
And build from it.
Yeah, well, so there'll still be a uv.log file, and that's still going to be unique to UV, but you'll still be able to say like -- export or something. I don't know what their exact UI is for exporting to like a requirements file, but they'll be able to say, hey, export to a pylock.toml file, which is the file name for log files. But PDM, for instance, wanted to use this as their log file format.
Okay.
Right? Like PDM said, like, you know what, if you go back to making this support multi-use, I will just use this.
Okay.
I will ditch pdm.lock. It will just be a pylock.toml. And if you need a very specific export for something, right, we can do that because the part of the spec is saying like the generic name is pylock.toml, or the default one is.
Yeah.
But you can go pylock.name of why this log file exists .toml.
Right. Okay.
Right. So like if you, for instance, if you had to have a special one for, I don't know, let's say Azure Functions, right? You could theoretically have a pylock.azurefunctions.toml.
Okay.
So like if some provider or some tooling goes like, hey, if you have a log file named this, we will just automatically use that, right? They also get support for that. That's why Frost came and said, I'm disappointed this didn't happen. Can you point to me where people said, no, don't do this? And I went like, well, it's not that people thought we're against it. Everyone was just saying it was hard.
Right.
And everyone just wanted to get this done. So I ripped it out to try to simplify my life. But as I said, I didn't wanna. I really wanted to see it happen, but it was getting harder. It was still hard to convince everyone like this is the way to go. So I was like, okay, one more time, I will try and make multi-use log files work. So I sat down, I updated the PEP one last time, and
shared it with those parties.
I shared it with everyone, and I said, look. And I specifically said Frost from PDM, Randy from Poetry, and Charlie from UV, right? It's specifically, Frost Ming, Randy Doring, assuming I'm not butchering Randy's last name. I'm sorry if I am, Randy. And then Charlie Marsh, like, okay, you all need to sign off on this.
Yeah.
Because I need the tools to buy into this. It's one thing to have users all go, I want a log file, but if none of the tools are going to use it, it's worthless. So I need you to all say, will you use this one way or the other, even if it's just an export target? And then otherwise, if it's multi-use, is it reasonable? And I basically said, okay, I need someone at least say they will definitely use it. I need PDM to say they will definitely use it. I need Poetry to say they will at least consider it. And UV was already off the hook because of their workspace concept. And I already knew, they already publicly said, we're not probably going to standardize on this as our internal format, but we'll definitely export to it. And I just need them to say, we'll still export to it.
Yeah.
I updated the PEP one last time and said like, okay, here it is. And Frost was fine with it. Randy for Poetry said, there's no red flags for us, so we'll definitely think about it at some point in the future. I mean, Poetry is very volunteer driven, so they can never make promises about timelines and stuff, but it's like, we will definitely consider it. That's looking at some point and using it. And then Charlie didn't have any issues. Charlie just said, hey, can we change this one thing from a string to a list of strings as to be able to specify default groups? And everyone said, okay. I said, okay, Paul, I'm done.
There you go. I'm submitting.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Tell me what you want me to remove to get you to accept this if it comes to that. Here's the PEP. And the whole pour more went back and looked at all the discussions around this. And I will say, over the history of this whole topic, there have been over 1,500 posts.
Wow.
So this is taken a long time.
Yeah.
He went back and he looked over the conversations and looked at the summaries and looked at what people brought up and did the PEP cover it and all that stuff. And on March 31st, Paul said, congratulations, Brett. I am accepting this PEP with no conditions. And it's done.
Wow. Cool.
And so PEP-751 was accepted. It feels like a bazillion years after I started thinking about this topic, but technically at least 6 years and at least 4 years since I first really actively started working on this with PEP-665. And it was accepted unconditionally, which is actually kind of a new thing too. Traditionally, we've actually accepted packaging PEPs with conditions, saying like, okay, this is conditionally accepted and these things have to happen before we make it officially accepted.
Okay.
And historically, we found when you do that, tools are reluctant to pick it up.
They're like, this is not set.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I don't want to pick it up. So Paul said, like, you know what? This file format's versioned, right? pyproject.toml is very specifically not versioned because it's meant for human beings. right? So you kind of need to always worry about backwards compatibility and how it works. So it was never
This is going to be used for machines.
Yeah, this is not meant to be human. It's meant to be human readable, but computer written. So because it's computer written, right? It's software written. You just need the software to be able to handle the version updates. So that's when Paul went like, you know what? If there's a problem with this, we will quickly do a version 1.1 or whatever, and we will just update it as necessary. And guess what? Hopefully, like if like UV's workspace concept works out, maybe we'll get that standardized, and then they can standardize, and there'll be like maybe a version 2 or whatever. But the key point is because it's versioned, we can always go like fix our mistakes, bump the version, tools just update to the new version, and everything just works.
Okay.
Hopefully. So yeah, it was unconditionally accepted on March 31st. And here we are talking about it a little over a week later, and I still can't wrap my head around it.
Did you go out to dinner and celebrate? That you're not going to have the conversations anymore?
I think we already had dinner plans conveniently, but it's one of those things. I have my friend Paul Ralph. He's actually a professor at Dalhousie in software engineering. We've talked about this of working on multi-year projects, coming to the end, and just not mentally knowing how to quite process it. Right? Not always is it done, but it's like it's not always. Yeah, woo! I want like it's not like an end of a sports game. Right? Like if you watch a sports game from beginning to end, it eats up 2 hours of your life or whatever. I mean, the actual game being played, right? We do the pre and post game stuff and whatever. But like the game, you see it start to end and it's done. You can be real celebratory, whatever. But for these multi-year projects, it's really hard to end it and go like, and that's just like, a bit of sigh of relief.
It's almost like finishing an album or finishing a movie, because you can also like wonder like, all right, who's going to watch it? Who's going to listen to it? How are they going to use it or whatever?
Yeah, your brain just doesn't. At least for me, it doesn't quite process it the same. It's not like I didn't throw my arms up. It was just like I went downstairs and told my wife, and I think my in-laws were over at the time helping watch the baby. Just like, it's done.
Ta-da.
And then I think my father-in-law like, okay, you got to explain to me what the heck this was all about, because even I know you've been working on this for a long time, and I don't know what you've been. So I explained it to him later, a couple days later.
Now you can just send him to the podcast, right?
Right. But yeah, it was just a really weird feeling, and I'm still processing it, right? Because it's just it took so long. As I said, it was over 1,500 posts on discusstopython.org about this.
Yeah.
I've read all of them. And I don't even want to know how many of them are actually from me. And I actually got what I wanted in the end, right? Like the PEP was accepted unconditionally with no changes. It's multi-use. It's got the security stuff I wanted in it. It has SDIS like people wanted, right? Like it's like I'm still like even in this conversation mentally processing that. What did I pull off? Like, I'm not trying to, this is not the humble brag, to be clear.
Right.
I'm not trying to like, oh, look at what Magic Brett pulled, but it's just like, I'm still mentally processing it. So it's really, I just can't quite.
That's interesting.
I'm hoping, it got announced the day we're recording this, that I'm going to keynote EuroPython. And it's probably going to be...
Yeah, congratulations on that. Yeah.
Thanks. So guess what the keynote's going to be about? And I'll probably go into a bit more detail because I'll have slides and stuff to be able to talk about the format and all that, and talk about like attestation identities, which I think is a really cool security feature that got added and all that stuff. But it's going to be interesting to see how much I've mentally processed by the time I give that talk.
Yeah.
Right. Because as I said, this is about a week later and I'm still mentally just kind of like realizing like what's happened. So,
The workspaces thing kind of confuses me a little bit. Like, I know that in a pyproject.toml, you can set up a table to say, this is what's going to be installed for my testing environment or things like that. Is that kind of what they mean by workspaces?
Yeah, extras and dependency groups.
Yeah.
So not quite. So usually, what I could be wrong, but what I believe UV means, at least from the Rust perspective, workspaces are basically some monorepo concept.
Okay.
Specifically. So most people aren't really run into this. Although Rust projects tend to like to kind of structure the whole projects as a bunch of sub-projects or crates in Rust terminology.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a common practice in the Rust community to set things up this way.
Oh, all right.
But effectively, it's like, okay, I'm going to have packages A, B, C, and D, and they're all going to have their own requirements and stuff, and they can all be worked on independently. But I'm also going to have the concept of workspace that encompasses all 4 projects, A, B, C, and D.
Okay.
And I want kind of like a big lock file that represents all 4 projects while they all also have their independent ones. So like I can work on package A on its own or package C on its own, and they have their own lock files. But if I want to install my lock file for everything, it'll work, and it'll work for all of them as well, right? So there's no drift.
It's like an interdependency kind of system.
Yeah. It's almost like, it's like an Uber lock file.
Okay.
Right? Every project coordinates to make sure that everyone doesn't step on each other's requirements and what you lock to, but they're still individual.
Yeah.
So that you can work on that project in isolation, but then there's also a way to pull up to a higher level lock file that covers all of them and will install everything at once. So everyone's got that same version of NumPy, for instance.
Yeah.
But you don't have to list everyone's individual requirements, so you have a huge thing, right? Because if one project requires PyTorch, suddenly you've installed an extra gig worth of data, right? But if all the ones don't need it, you just need to coordinate on NumPy, then that's way easier to do.
It's in the space.
Right. But if you want the big lock file that's coordinating all this and says like, okay, if you got a lock to everything, here's what you need. You get that. So that's what workspaces typically represents.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking about, with consideration being, will this work similarly for people that are using, in the data science world, the types of tools out there and locking that sort of stuff. Like that world's in its own sort of flux, which is interesting too. You have like the
WheelNext project. Do you know about that?
The tooling is kind of rapidly changing also. There's sort of a Rustification happening there too with, I think, Pixie and Mamba and Micro Mamba, these other kinds of interesting kind of like tooling things happening there.
So that's all the Conda side of the world, right?
Yeah.
So not the PyPA side of the world. So on the PyPA side of the world,
right,
a couple companies are getting together around a project called WheelNext. I think their website for the project is wheelnext.dev.
Okay.
They actually just had a little get together this past March, just like a month ago, in Silicon Valley, I think at NVIDIA. And what they're all trying to do is basically fill the gaps, as it were, that are in the PyPA side, basically the PyPI side of packaging.
Yeah.
So it can do better.
Okay.
Right? Which is outside of lock files and what this represents, but it's trying to help push it so that those will get filled. And those standards will have to update the log file format or update themselves for when they get proposed to make sure they take log files into consideration. But for instance, they're talking about how do you like the common example is OpenBlast, and you don't need to know what it is, but it's basically a C library for doing stuff, math stuff and what are things.
Okay.
Various science projects rely on it, and right now, if you want a wheel for a project that uses it, they have to compile it into their wheel, which is a little wasteful space-wise.
Sure.
And it's like, why can't you just build and use OpenBlast itself and then just have Python load that, or have the package load that without having to install multiple ones, right? Like this is what one of the things Anaconda does.
Yeah.
Because Anaconda is basically an OS level package manager.
Yeah.
It can package manage like C level projects.
Right.
And just say, oh, my Python project relies on the C project.
It goes beyond just the Python. It has all these other
Exactly.
So people can even have other files in it, which is always interesting to me. Like you can see, I want my data in there too.
I mean, it packages anything: R, Julia, C, Python. Like Conda is way bigger than just Python itself. It's just, I think Python is just the biggest user of Conda for stuff.
Okay.
And so the WheelNext project is trying to do things such as figure out like, okay, how could we make wheels and stuff support specifying that I rely on this like .so file, this C library, like OpenBlast, and not have to have multiple copies of it or have everyone compile it in. And they're also talking about things like variants is the terminology they're using, saying like, hey, I want the version of PyTorch that is optimized for my GPU. Or I want NumPy knowing that I use this CPU so it can use these faster CPU instructions, right? Because like there are extensions to like x64 that you can either assume everyone has,
right?
Because you're like me and you're old enough to just remember what the hell MMX is, because that was a big deal for when Unreal came out as a game way back when,
Yes.
right?
All right.
Versus some of the newer stuff where it's like, not everyone's chip is necessarily going to have that. So we have to assume no one has it.
Okay.
Versus, no, this would make things faster if you have it. So let's make two versions of our wheel, one that assumes you have whatever extension and one doesn't.
Yeah.
But usually GPUs are the big motivator there. And so the Wheel Next project's trying to work through all this. But that's all orthogonal to this, because basically the log file will just have to somehow get spec up to get updated to handle those concepts. But those haven't come forward as PEPs yet and what have you. So
yeah,
I get to say, not my problem.
Nice. Yeah. Wow. Well, we're over an hour. What I wanted to talk to you about a little bit, I guess we can just kind of just do an update on it. You're still involved in
Sure.
The terminology feels so weird, but like the targets of development for Python for WASI and WASM.
Yes.
Is that still in your thing? Okay. All right. Am I using the words right? I feel like it's such a weird jumble of words.
Yeah, effectively. So actually, as part of my work for WebAssembly and WASI specifically, I updated PEP-11.
Okay.
Which is the platforms that CPython supports. And we added the concept of tiers.
Yeah.
So there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3.
Yeah.
Tier 1 are platforms you're not allowed to break in the main branch of CPython ever. Like you cannot commit code that will break it.
Right. It has to be stable.
Yeah. It's effectively what do we have in CI
to
make sure you never break it.
Okay.
Tier 2 is when it's not covered in CI, it's going to be covered by our build bot fleet. But if you break it, you have to fix it within 24 hours or your change gets rolled back.
Okay.
And then tier 3 is we test it. It's there. If it's broken, it's broken.
We'll get to it. Maybe.
It's usually no one's going to be told they have to make it work.
Okay.
You have to change your code and your approach to make that platform be supported.
And this is always if there are changes that, in that case, it would just roll back until the change is fixed or whatever.
Not even. So with tier 3, if it's broken, it's that on a platform, that platform is just flat out broken. It's really more just listening, like we have tests for this and there's a core developer trying to keep an eye on it, but it's never going to hold up a release, basically.
Okay.
Tier 2 will hold up a release and tier 1 will very much hold up a release.
Okay.
So basically tier 2 and tier 1 are the ones that was like, yeah, we cannot do a release of Python if any of those platforms are not working.
Okay.
Tier 3, we'll totally release without it. But you at least know that we're watching it and someone's keeping an eye on it and trying to make it work. But who knows how long it'll work or not.
The ones that you were doing were tier 3 when we talked quite a while ago.
Yeah. And then now WASI's to tier 2.
Okay.
Thanks to my coworker, Eric Snow, being a co-sign on it.
Sweet.
Although, yeah, I'm still the primary driver of that.
Okay.
But yeah, the one of the requirements with tier 2 is you have to have 2 core devs sign off on it because it can block a release. You don't want someone holding up a release because they're on vacation and some platform breaks in an odd way. So you got to have a backup for someone to be able to come in and go like, okay, I can help get this fixed because we're doing a release tomorrow and suddenly it broke, right?
Yeah, cool.
And then tier 1, all core devs are considered supporting that platform because it's in CI. So there's no one specific call out because we're all technically called out if it breaks.
Okay. And so that was a change, I don't know, I think it's maybe a year and a half ago, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Feels like 2 years ago at this point. Yeah, somewhere around there. I don't know. It all blurs for me at this point. So I have to still look up when something got added to Python because it's just landed in Python at some point, and I don't tie it to versions. Right? It's not. I read the release notes still out of interest just to make sure I didn't miss anything. But because I follow the development, things just land. It's something like, oh, it's in Python. Versus it's not very much like every October I get to read release notes and go, oh, suddenly new thing for me. I get to notice it, and it's very distinct in my brain that, okay, 3.13 brought this feature in. It's not like it landed at some point.
Okay.
I know it's in Python. I just don't know when it came in, and I still have to look it up myself. Anyway, so yeah, hence the fuzziness on dates in my brain. Plus, I'm a parent, so everything's fuzzy.
Reminder, yeah.
So as I got to tier 2, main should always work for WASI within at least 24 hours. So you might have to roll back 24 hours worth of changes if something doesn't work off of main for WASI, but otherwise it works. It's actually in CI. I just haven't pushed to make it a tier 1 thing, although theoretically I maybe could with enough work and effort. If I can simplify the development details enough so that if it broke, people could easily get going and working on it, I might be able to pull it off, but I haven't tried yet.
You got to maybe have some more parties say yes, that they want to be part of that.
Yeah. I mean, to an extent, right? It's like I don't have a Mac, so it's not like I can work on Mac breakages, but I at least have CI there to make sure that if something were to go wrong, I can at least see the output. And because WebAssembly, WASI specifically, is in CI, if something were to break, you can see it. It's more stuff like I need to make sure there's a container always set up appropriately, and people could easily like get a container if they need to get the tooling, so they don't have to install tools on their machine. They can just grab a container and just go and have the right things and be able to test everything out.
Are you using it in the new container tools? Or are you still like a pure Docker person? Or are you using...
I don't use Docker.
Oh, you don't? Okay. What do you use for containers?
I don't.
You don't get into them?
I only make containers work because people ask me to make containers work, not because I use containers.
Yeah.
I have, because for the WASI stuff, for instance, I have it all just installed, right? I don't care. It goes into /ops/WASI SDK and I'm done. It's not a big deal for me. So I've never kept an eye on any of this container stuff. It's never been a thing. I use virtual environments for Python. That's enough isolation for me.
Right.
Yeah. It's just, I've never gotten into the whole container thing. I mean, I get the concept.
Yeah.
But it's just not my thing. So I don't have a good answer. It's whatever I can find instructions for.
Okay. All right. Are there any new recent things that are exciting to you in that space of like Pyodide and WASI and stuff that are happening there? You're like, oh, this is very cool. I want to share it.
Well, so Pyodide, which is a separate thing. So Pyodide's outside of CPython itself.
Right.
But there is active work being done by Hood Chatham, and I know Kushlinga is supporting it. But Russell Keith McGee, who works on Beware, he is sponsoring as a core dev Emscripten support for WebAssembly. And so that's a tier 3 platform. It was temporarily not because I was supporting both.
Okay.
And I just couldn't keep it going. I don't know enough about Emscripten. I was only doing it because way back when all this WebAssembly stuff started with Christian Himes and me, Christian supported both. So when Christian basically burned out, I took over both.
Okay.
I finally just said, like, look, I need to not kid myself here. I don't know what the heck I'm doing with this Emscripten stuff.
Okay.
I know what's going on with WASI stuff, but Emscripten not my thing. So I said, I'm stepping away. I think that was December of 2023. I said that.
Okay.
And then this past core dev sprint in September, Russell, I think, signed up and said, I'll take it back to tier 3 if he gets work sign off, and he did. So he brought it back to tier 3. My guess is it'll probably eventually make it to tier 2 just because so many people are always excited about Python in the browser.
Yeah.
And so my suspicion is Emscripten support will get there. Now, Pyodide is a project, because Hood is one of the maintainers of Pyodide, my understanding is he's slowly just pushing more and more of their little changes that they have upstream to CPython itself. So the diff between Pyodide and what you would get from an Emscripten build of CPython itself is getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Okay.
I don't know how small it's going to get. It might eventually get to nothing, and Pyodide is more of a distribution. I don't know.
Okay.
My suspicion, though, is it'll eventually get to tier 2, purely because there's just enough interest from people, because who doesn't like Python in the browser?
Yeah.
But I'm not involved in that in any way. It's, as I said, WASI's enough. I've already not been doing enough WASI lately because, once again, lock files.
Right.
But that's still going. We are starting to have conversations, though, about compatibility decisions and maybe what it would look like to have wheels for WASI.
Okay.
Those are actively going on.
And I guess maybe, I don't know if there's a quick way to explain to people, like, I mean, if they haven't listened to the previous episodes of us talking about it, what that sort of entails or like lets you do with WASI is that you can sort of have a version of these programs that will run on this system without having
So the quick explanation. So the quick explanation of all this is WebAssembly is the base layer that's coming between the Emscripten and WASI stuff, and WebAssembly is a what's technically a virtualized CPU ISA. It's basically a fake CPU,
Okay.
right? And it's designed to be fast and efficient and safe because it was designed to work in the browser, right? Which is its big appeal. And it's
sandboxed in that case. Yeah.
compatible across all machines, right? Because browsers run everywhere. So it's designed to be very compatible and to be able to run fast on various CPU architectures that actually needs to run on.
Right.
Right. So that's the base layer. And then you build on top of that. Emscripten is a compiler that can take C code and compile it down to WebAssembly. And it does so by shimming things in to make it use the browser's APIs, right? So Emscripten, for instance, can fake dynamic loading of your .so files. If you compile something like NumPy for using Emscripten, it'll create a .so file, but it's for WebAssembly. And then it does a bunch of crazy JavaScript trickery to make it so that Python can pull that in as a separate file and to do all this crazy stuff. But that's effectively what Emscripten does, is it takes C code and compiles it to work in the browser. WASI is more of a standard, and people involved with WASI don't love it when I use this analogy, but it works. It's kind of like POSIX for WebAssembly. It's a set of standards on how to work with the system.
Right. The SI is a systems interface, right?
Yeah, exactly. WebAssembly systems interface. And it's really about running WASI as its own thing on the computer in the OS, right? So Emscripten targets the browser. Think of WASI as targeting everything else, right? So if you want to run something in WebAssembly on an IoT device, on a server,
right,
any of those scenarios.
We talked about it running on a lot of things were programmed in it for like the Apple TV box and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. The Disney Plus app in your TV is actually a WebAssembly app.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know. So, I mean, it's surprisingly used broadly. But the thing is WASI is getting used in like cloud scenarios, for instance. Fastly is a big investor in WASI because Fastly's function as a service, or their serverless or edge compute, or whatever term you want to use.
Yeah.
I think they use edge compute technically at Fastly, is all WebAssembly. So you can give Fastly your code and then they'll run it in their CDN, right? For instance, Microsoft has a project called Hyperlight that's open source that like lets you boot up stuff in like 1 millisecond. Actually faster than that, I think.
Wow.
I can't remember. The numbers are so freaking low because you can do crazy tricks with WebAssembly, and because it's secure, because it was designed for the browser, you don't have to have a full container, right? Because you historically used to people running hypervisors, running containers to get all the security that you need to host other people's code. With WebAssembly, you don't need that. With WebAssembly, because the actual instruction set itself is the security layer, and then with WASI, how you interact with the OS is another other security layer. You need way less depth of security to make things work, so things run way faster because there's just less running. So that's the difference between effectively WASI and Emscripten. And I'm on not the browser stuff. I'm on the more server side of things.
Yeah, you were kind of involved in both for that initial part, like you said, and now you're kind of more on that side. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So the WASI bit is we're trying to figure out what we want to do about wheels. What do we want to do about backwards compatibility? Like, do we want to say like what the WASI SDK, for instance, is the tool chain we use to do our compiles for WASI? Like, what do we want to say? Like, what version will Python 3.14 be? We will say is compatible with. What about 3.15? And like, how are we going to do that? Like, we're just starting to have those conversations because we're just starting to get enough people interested to come forward and say, like, hey, I've now built wheels for WASI using NumPy, which is cool and a little tricky too, because WASI doesn't let you dynamically load stuff. It has to all be statically compiled in. So you have to run, there's like an extra tool step to slurp everything into one file. But people are starting to do it and make it work. And so we're starting to have those kind of more formal conversations about like, okay, what does WASI as a platform look like for CPython in terms of wheels and compatibility and support timelines and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where WASI is right now for Python.
Is there a place to quote unquote watch this space online?
Yeah, no, no, it's all done in the open. So the way it works is the WebAssembly standard is run by the W3C.
Okay.
WASI, which is layers on top of WebAssembly, is run by the Bytecode Alliance. which is totally separate from the W3C. It is a nonprofit, though. The Bytecode Alliance has a Zulip chat. I don't remember the exact URL. I think it might be bytecodealliance.zulip.com. I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes, knowing you.
Yeah.
But that's where all the discussions happen. It's all totally open. And there's literally a Python subgroup channel/discussion. We try to meet, I think we're monthly at this point. Maybe, I think we meet about monthly right now. And yeah, we get together, we talk asynchronously through Zulip, but we also try to get together once a month and just talk and just try to work through this stuff and just try to keep things going and moving forward without me being a complete hold up on everything, because I have way too many things going on at once, and which is not necessarily always good for me and getting stuff done in a timely fashion. But we're keeping the wheels on the car going and turning. And
definitely.
Or sorry, with a kid now, the wheels on the bus keep going round and round.
Exactly. Well, I'll have to have you come back on and talk about what you're working toward next. I know you wanted to hint on it, that you're maybe turning your focus back toward Python Launcher. But it might be interesting to have you back to discuss that stuff. And
yes, now that I'm a parent and I'm assuming someday my child will learn Python, I do not want them coming home from school and going, "Dad, why is this so hard to get going?" So yeah, I'm going to, I think, probably pivot to my next multi-year project to try to, once again, kind of get more standards and things working with stuff that would make getting started easier. Yeah, it's effectively something that I've been thinking about, that I think UV and Rye before that kind of helped, and PDM and Hatch have all done, to be clear, but is basically, don't make it about installing Python to run your Python code.
Yeah.
Right? Because historically it was install a Python, install a tool to install Python, install a tool, run your code.
Yeah.
But PDM and Hatch and UV have all popularized the install a tool, run your code.
Yeah.
Right. They take out that Python bit, and they're making it way easier with like ephemeral virtual environments and all this stuff, right? That PEP-723 and inline script metadata help with, and just, what can I do to help make that easier? And yes, I can always come back on to talk more about that. That's the next multi-year project. And what does that require? Backfilling and beginning to be easier to work with.
So it sounds like you've had a chance to play with all those different tools, and it'd be interesting to hear your opinions across all of them, because I'm a person who's converting a little bit to the UV world. Like I wasn't using a lot of the other ones, and I had my own misconceptions toward certain additional tools that were out there, like pyvenv or and things like that. Where I was having problems with it, and I was like, I
got rid of pyvenv.
Yeah.
That used to be the tool that we installed to help create virtual environments, and then I got that removed out of the Python installs because it was A, confusing for people, and B, it didn't lead to the right user experience, because people would run pyvenv and not know what actual Python version they had installed was connected to. So we said, forget it. Python-mvenv is the way to create your virtual environments, so you know exactly what Python you were using to create that virtual environment. So I killed pyvenv.
Nice. Well, I always like to have people answer the questions at the end of the show, and so what are you excited about that's happening in the world of Python right now?
I am a little excited. So the PyPA actually has a PEP that's in draft right now about setting up a packaging council. I don't know if that's going to be its official name at the end of all this.
Okay.
But basically trying to spare poor Paul Moore from me, the single person that has to deal with all of this packaging spec stuff. And let's be honest, PEP's for me. Although, as I said, I'm going to potentially switching direction away from packaging a bit and more towards the Python launcher and stuff. But anyway, there's a PEP to set up a council.
Okay.
And I'm kind of excited about that because I think it will ease the burden. But I don't want to see speed things up, because you don't want to move too fast on this stuff.
Right.
Like, this is not a move fast to break things kind of area of the world. You want things to be done very thoughtfully, and I think a council would, but I think it'd be way easier and just less stress on Paul, as I said, to have a council. Same thing with why we set up the steering council after Guido stepped down. It was like, I think Paul deserves a break. So I think setting up a council would be good, and just good for him in general.
Cool. What's something that you want to learn next? This doesn't have to be coding or Python specific.
How my kid's going to walk. He's getting there,
right.
But he hasn't done his first. Yeah, they haven't done their first step yet.
Are there things you can set up in the house to make it easier?
Yeah. Don't remind me. I still got to set up a baby gate, and I keep putting it off because I just don't want to screw anything into the wall because we moved a few months back, and it's just I'm still in the stage of I don't want to put permanent holes in the wall yet.
Yeah.
I will say, funny enough, I learned another programming language called Gleam, Gleam.
Yeah, I saw the post on the site.
Yeah, I have a blog post about it, and I'm still enjoying it. I'm still doing the lessons, the exercises from Exorcism, if you know that website. Or is it Exorism, I think is maybe the proper name. It's just a fun little language. I learned it in like 2 days while I was on parental leave from work and before our kids showed up because they were a bit late. So I had a few spare days to just relax and not get too involved in something because they could have shown up any day, but they kept not showing up. So I learned Gleam in like 2 days.
Okay.
It really was more just a day, but it's just taken enough time. I just chopped it up. And it's still fun. It's a really small, it's this typed language. It can run either on the Erlang Beam or in JavaScript. Community is very nice, very friendly, very open. Reminds me of the Python community in that regard. Like they're very welcoming of everyone, no matter gender, ethnicity, whatever. They do not care, which is great. If you go read their website as to what their code of conduct is, I can't say it on air because there's a slight swear word in it.
Yeah.
But basically, it's like no Nazi BS kind of stuff. Like there's, I really appreciate it. So, but that's what I'm to it. But it's a nice small language. It's functional, which is always fun and a nice little twist on the brain to use. I mean, Python's somewhat functional, but pure functional, like no if statement functional.
Okay.
So it's just always fun to try to, how the heck do I solve this with no if? Or no while, right? And just having to remember how to do all that again.
It scratches that itch that you've always talked about when you come on the show about wanting to look at other languages and see what Python might do with that and things like that, other ideas.
Yeah. And now that I'm a parent, I have less time for that. So it's one of those, do I keep trying to learn a whole bunch of languages or do I lean in a bit? And I leaned into a language called Rescript about a year or so ago because I rewrote one of my GitHub Actions that I wrote in JavaScript. I was just finding it too frustrating and annoying to maintain. So I learned to Rescript thanks to my friend, Dusty Phillips, who is a fan of the language. And I enjoyed it, but I kind of fell down a rabbit hole of languages that are not JavaScript, but will run in the browser that are not WebAssembly.
Okay.
Just to be a little different. And Gleam really caught my eye, and it's just been fun. I still want to learn Elixir and then kind of look at those because I think the Beam is really, really cool. If you've never looked at the Erlang Beam, it's a really cool piece of technology. It runs telephone switches, which have crazy uptimes, right? So like there's some really cool tech in there for distributed systems and just fault-tolerant software. So I've always found that kind of cool. But so I'm just kind of leaning into it and just, as I said, doing the Exorism projects when I need a little break during work or something for like 15 minutes or something.
Yeah, shift your gears and put your brain in a different space. Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm really learning because I already learned it.
Right.
But at least it's relaxing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just being a parent means not a lot of time to learn anything too new at the moment.
Yeah. There's a whole set of skills that you're learning there. So
that's definitely the thing I'm currently learning and will continue to be learning for what I've been told is the rest of my life. So
yeah.
But hopefully next time I come on, I'll have more of an answer of something else because
that's good. Yeah.
Kids get older, give a little bit more time back, but the problems get harder from what I understand. So
what's the best way that people can follow your work online now?
So my blog is still there and I still try to keep that going. So snarky.ca. I am on Mastodon, Brett Cannon at fosstodon.org. I am on Blue Sky at snarky.ca. I have all my notes for my open source stuff online at opensource.snarky.ca. I don't really expect people to follow it. It's honestly mostly there. So I have an easy way to share links to people about like my next planned PEP instead of having to ship around text files or copy and pasting a bunch of stuff.
Or be stuck in email, or something,
Yeah, it's all Obsidian at the end of the day for me. So I'm just pushing that all live. Those are probably the easiest ways.
Yeah. I saw you have a letterboxed thing, so yeah, people are interested.
Yes. Yeah, if you go to opensource.snarky.ca, the default page is my personal FAQ on me to just say who the heck I am. And then I have a list of media I like on there, because it was also an easy way to share what video games I physically own for any friends or books that I have. So if any friends want to borrow a physical book that me or Andrea happen to have, they can go there. Or they want to borrow a game that we happen to have physically, they can, or want to know what could we play that we both own.
Yeah.
It's all on there as well. So yeah, my Letterboxd account is there. I know some people like to say their retirement plan is their Steam account. My retirement plan is my Letterboxd account, because I have like over 800 movies on my to-watch list.
Your wish list? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That was also how I very quickly knew how much time our kid was taking us, because if you go and look at the diary of when I watch things,
you got like one movie a month now.
I'm back to one movie a month. There was a 3-month gap there of nothing.
Oh wow.
So you can tell when suddenly the naps stopped being all day and there started to be more stuff to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, Andrew and I are starting to slowly get back up to like maybe. I mean, the kid's still at 2 naps a day, so it's not quite a single chunk of time for a movie.
Right.
But they're heading towards 1 nap, which is heading towards like a 2-hour block.
Okay.
So maybe soon on the weekends we'll be able to watch movies again.
There we go. Yeah.
Someday.
All right. Well, Brett, thanks so much for coming on the show again. It's fantastic to talk to you again.
Thanks for having me, because we're always happy to be here.
I want to thank Brett Cannon for coming back on the show. And I want to thank you for listening to the EuroPython podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the EuroPython podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and look forward to talking to you soon.